This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 674, entitled Women Need to Appreciate Men a Lot More. Description. This flyer explains why women need to become a lot more appreciative of men for the ways that women benefit from men, since men, with their genetic superiorities, create cultures, and women parasite off them. For monoconscious feminism, with its contempt for men for the ways that men oppress women, such an appreciation of men by women is blocked. So biconscious masculists, with their knowledge that women oppress men far worse, are out to destroy monoconsciousness by forcing monoconscious feminists to convert themselves to biconsciousness, or risk having their biconscious boyfriends, partners, husbands dump them for these women's hypocritical, bigoted monoconsciousness. Masculists target these men, teaching them masculism, so that these men can then push their monoconscious feminist girlfriends to convert themselves to being biconscious feminists. When most feminists are biconscious, they will be a lot more open to accepting the many genetic superiorities of men, as listed in this flyer, and thus become a lot more realistically humble towards men. The flyer itself. Women Should Appreciate Men a Lot More, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. When I hear some monoconscious feminazi sounding off against men with her monoconscious feminist gender politics, I think to myself, quotes, another MFB, that's monoconscious feminazi bigot, who has been brainwashed by feminism, monoconscious feminism, that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women the oppressed. So, of course, she feels justified in lashing out at the ways that men oppress women. So, obviously, does not appreciate men for what men do for women. These women have been brainwashed by monoconscious feminists for 6 decades that gender oppression is a one-way street. So the level of this indoctrination is deep. That will take a major psychological force to counter it, which is where masculism comes in. Masculists need to make their presence felt with these monoconscious feminazi bigots, MFBs, by haranguing them with verbally violent, ideologically hateful masculist rhetoric, teaching them that gender oppression is very much a two-way street. So that the next time a feminazi plans to dump on men in public, she had better consider the possibility that in her audience might be some masculists who might bite her fucking feminazi head off, screaming at her such statements as, quote, learn some masculism, you monoconscious feminazi cunt. Learn that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that you women oppress men far worse than vice versa with your horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, such as women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. These are horrible gender crimes that are a lot more serious than the minor gender crimes that men commit against women. To masculists like me, even rape, one of the worst gender crimes that men commit against women, is seen as small beer compared to the big 3 mentioned above, which are horrible and cause masculists to hate gender criminal women and punish them so badly that we effectively exterminate them. Since we totally ignore them, we don't even pump and dump them, so that they rot on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at, totally rejected both socially and sexually. You feminazi bitches need to become a lot more appreciative of men and consider that without men, you women could not even survive 6 months. End quote. Consider the following thought experiment. Imagine that suddenly all the women died. The men then could live on for another century until the last man died, but probably the men would undertake a crash research program to solve the reproduction problem, to create a new generation. Now, if suddenly all the men died, then the women would crash back to the Stone Age within 6 months in a massive starvation die-off due to women being unable to service the machines needed to run a modern 8 billion, in brackets now 4 billion since the men have died, world population. In other words, women could not survive without men, but men could survive without women, so long as they could find ways to create babies. Masculists aim to force women, especially monoconscious feminazi bigot women, to become biconscious. That is, to have both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, which means, in practice, that these women need to learn some masculism, since they are already, in brackets, monoconscious feminists. By becoming biconscious, these former MFBs, monoconscious feminazi bigots, will become a lot nicer to men, since they will have had their monoconscious feminist brainwashing by feminism, in brackets, that gender oppression is a one-way street, which generates a hatred of men for the ways that men oppress women, close brackets, cancelled, capital letters, by a corresponding female masculinist hatred of gender criminal women who commit horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. For example, the big three of women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering, which are truly hateable gender crimes that cause masculists to hate such gender criminal women and punish them so badly that they effectively exterminate them by totally ignoring them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, dying slowly, alone, childless, manless, sexless, loveless, and reviled. Once the masculists have attacked the monoconscious feminazi bigots, MFBs, sufficiently so that nearly all of them have become biconscious, then these women will become more open to the idea that they ought to be a lot more appreciative of men and for what men do for them in society. But before this greater appreciation by women of men can grow substantially, it's likely that millions of women, monoconscious feminist women, will need to go through a lot of pain inflicted on them by biconscious masculists who are out to wipe out monoconscious feminism by either converting monoconscious feminists to biconsciousness or to forcing MFBs to rot on the shelf. Masculists have a very effective strategy to force monoconscious feminists to become biconscious, and that is by masculists targeting these women's male feminist boyfriends, partners, husbands, by teaching these men masculism, so that these men become biconscious, who then see the monoconscious attitudes of their feminist girlfriends as hypocritical and bigoted, become disgusted with them, and then dump them. So it's very much in a monoconscious feminist self-interest to become biconscious before, capital letters, the man in her life does. So if not, if her man becomes biconscious before she does, then he will see her monoconscious feminism as contemptible due to its deep hypocrisy, lashing out at men for the relatively minor ways that men oppress women, in brackets, for example, sexual harassment, domestic violence, rape, patriarchy, etc., when compared to the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men, e.g. the big three mentioned above of manslavery, divorce, rape, and forced fathering, which are seen by masculists as so horrible that masculists effectively exterminate monoconscious feminists and fluffies, in brackets, traditional women who expect to live off the money and labour of a man and hence seen by masculists as manslaving, divorce-raping vermin to be exterminated by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, close brackets. by totally ignoring them. The Masculists have two main enemies, fluffies and fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, who want equal rights for women in the parliaments but see divorcing mothers as fluffies, so treat divorcing fathers as cash machines to be abused and robbed, to pay for fluffy mothers to remain fluffy mothers, with no moral nor legal obligation on them to fip up and stop manslaving and divorce raping their divorcing husbands. Masculists aim to cause millions of monoconscious feminists a lot of pain by causing the men in their lives to dump them, as explained above. These dumped monoconscious feminists will then see with their own eyes that their former boyfriends, partners, husbands are now pairing off with biconscious feminists who are a lot more pleasant to be with than monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts who are so brainwashed by monoconscious feminists that they actually believe that gender oppression is a one-way street, making biconscious masculists hate them for their hypocrisy and misandry. So these masculists then aim to wipe them from the earth, removing their monoconscious feminist genes from the gene pool. Over time, as a result of millions of verbally bitter, ideologically hateful confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, millions of monoconscious feminists will convert themselves to becoming biconscious feminists, who will then lose their anger at men because they will see, thanks to their new female masculist knowledge, that gender oppression is a two-way street and that women oppress men worse. This more positive attitude towards men will then cause these women to be a lot more open to the idea that men should be appreciated a lot more than was the case when they were monoconscious feminazi bigots, MFBs. Masculists will then be a lot more able to persuade these biconscious feminists that they should be a lot more appreciative towards men and accept being a lot more humble towards men's genetic superiorities relative to women. Masculists teach women and society that in many respects women are genetically inferior to men in the following ways. Women's brains are 10% smaller than men's, so have 8 billion fewer neurons inside their female heads, thus 10% less neural processing capacity. Women don't build anything, invent anything, create anything. It's men who create cultures and women who parasite off them. Women have always been parasites of men. Women evolved to be prostitutes to men, bribing men with sex to extract male-created resources, for example, male-hunted meat, etc. The human female is thus the sexiest of mammals, since she evolved to be in sexual heat every day of the month, to be better able to bribe men with sex, unlike female monkeys or female dogs. Without men, women would not have survived in their present form. Monoconscious feminists complain a lot now about toxic masculinity, in brackets, causing the wars, the rape, the violence, etc., close brackets, being ignorant of the fact that their very existence is due to men being like that. There's an interesting series of documentaries on Netflix called Chimp Empire, which shows that chimps go to war between rival contiguous tribes of chimps. The tribes with the fiercest alpha males conquer their neighbouring tribes, taking over their resources, for example, the banana and fruit trees in the conquered chimps' territories, thus allowing more of the conquering tribe's females to have more babies. Most monoconscious feminists know nothing of evolutionary psychology, so come out with silly ideas that are ignorant of science, which makes masculist scientists, like myself, contemptuous of the iscyanate fairydom of these feminists. Masculists want biconscious feminists to be a lot more humble regarding the genetic superiorities of men. Not only do men have 10% bigger brains than women and are 4 IQ points smarter than women on average, but men also have a 10% greater IQ variance than women. So over a whole population, women's IQ scores are more bunched up. whereas men's are more spread out. So that the morons and the genii are males. So it's not surprising that women have won a pathetic 3% of science Nobel Prizes. Women lack genius and have 20 times less testosterone in their blood than men, so are hugely less aggressive, less ambitious, less persistent, less dogged than men, so finish difficult tasks far less often than men. So the female accomplishment record is grossly inferior to men's. So it's not surprising that elite performing males have never taken women seriously, given women's grossly inferior performance track record. Masculists want women to see this reality of greater male performance and learn to be humble towards men, accepting the fact that men are the genii and have a hugely superior performance track record. You can see why elite, biconscious, masculist males have such a contempt for the bigoted, monoconscious ignorance of monoconscious feminists and despise them, and by totally ignoring them, wipe their monoconscious feminazi genes from the gene pool. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In brackets. Click on the Masculist tab for 670 plus Masculist essays and their videos. See also a London Reel interview on Masculism at AI will kill 1 billion people, do we create our exterminators? Professor Hugo de Garis, London Reel, in brackets. See the last half hour of this 2-hour interview for the Masculist segment. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, MGTOW.tv and